Hello and welcome to another Enspiral podcast. And today I'm here with John, our ex-catalyst, to talk about assembly sprints. Welcome, welcome.
Glad to be here. Thanks, Michał.
It's my pleasure. So, assembly sprints is this mysterious, or maybe not, technology in Enspiral. I'm curious to hear in your words, like, what is it? What's the context? How did it came up, and what is it for?
So assembly sprints were a idea to improve our governance at Enspiral in the wake of I joined in 2016 and this must have been around 2018 or a little bit earlier. And we were just seeing lots of Lumio conversations and especially decisions drag on. And and you never knew when they were happening, and we were getting relatively low participation in various community decisions. Um, Not helped by some people in Lumio and some people in Slack and preferences. So the assembly sprint was a way of concentrating people's attention on a couple of weeks so that we could move forward a number of decisions that were important to the community, and not just decisions but also important discussions. um, so it was really brought about by this desire for Enspiral to be member driven and co-created. And so, yeah, we typically would host it on Lumio um, in the first place, and we'd have some Zoom calls along the way. So we'd have a number of different discussions. We'd come up with a menu that the community would populate. So we'd first start with a theme usually. Um, Trying to remember one of the themes at the moment, but some kind of like, oh, here's where we're at, what's the next season looking like, and invite people to say what are the most important decisions or conversations. So I'm looking at one of them. We had one where we talked about the gatherings working group and also the retreats and how to have more sustainable retreats. We talked about Enspiral and Better Work Together Academy, which is a thing now, which is really cool. Um, the catalyst for fundraising at the time, and then the financial agreement. So we talked about those things. That was in 2019.
Cool. So it seems like it's basically kind of a concentration of energy and just like creating a space to tell everyone in the network, like, hey, we're gonna do some work now. Come and join us if you want. And those are the topics that are now relevant for us. And in this particular time frame, we're just gonna be putting some energy into that.
Yeah, kind of like a convention or a barn raising party, but over a couple of weeks.
Makes sense. And was there some kind of relationship to rhythm? Like, what was this a regular practice that we held over, like every couple of months or once a year, or it was more like whenever needed, somebody would wave a flag, hey, it's time for assembly sprint.
Both. We tried to get in one a year, and maybe at one point we were even going every 6 months. We did about four of them, possibly five, over the course of a few years.
Makes sense. So one thing that is coming up for me, and it's interesting you mentioned also retreats, because like it seems to me, or at least from where I'm understanding in Spiral, like one of the very core rhythms is the retreats, which is like this ultimate concentration of energy where people actually come together, and a lot of things happen in that space. So I'm curious, what is the relationship between the retreats and assembly sprints? Like, is there some kind of like, I mean, I assume they complement each other in different ways, but how do you see the relationship between the two?
From so when I was running assembly sprints, I was a catalyst of the network, and in that role, paying attention to kind of the energy of the network, and trying to support that energy to yeah, be as generative as it could be throughout the year. And so from that perspective, the retreats always meant upswell in energy of the Enspiral community. There'd be a lot more action online,
Mm,
mostly just afterwards when people had really felt the Enspiral. Doris, or the cook of Enspiral Summerfest, and all of our Aotearoa New Zealand gatherings, we'll always say it's like really when Enspiral comes alive, like you can feel the presence of Enspiral, and people get really activated by that. And so oftentimes we would try to run assembly sprints, also co-budget rounds, uh, in the wake of the retreat, because oftentimes the retreat would bring up topics, or some pre-work would start to get done, or sometimes we'd intentionally do work at the retreats. For instance, we had that big transition process, that kind of change management process for the network, renovating membership we were talking about just a touch earlier. And we did some work at the retreat specific for that. We played the renovating membership game. And then we came out of that and we did an assembly sprint that was mostly focused, not solely, but mostly focused on renovating membership. And that ended up in a proposal that actually eventually got enacted into our policies.
mm. Yeah, I see how they kind of play together. And it's interesting you mentioned this upswell of energy. I like this phrase. It's yeah, like these events seem to naturally catalyze like so much excitement, and post events, it's kind of almost very easy to harness this and just turn it into something tangible. But then throughout the year, as people get back to their own lives, their own project, as this energy kind of fades, I guess that's potential role of the assembly sprint, right? To like create, no, like there is energy, let's make stuff, and co-create, also like connect the pieces that can be created in the retreat with the assembly sprint. I wonder, like in the process of doing couple of iterations, what were the kind of main insights that you're taking away from this whole process of experimenting? Like, I mean, Enspiral is quite an experimental network in general. So I've seen, like, even scanning through old Lumio posts, like the process is changing. We're trying different things. We're experimenting. Oh, this doesn't work so well, so let's try this. But like over this couple of years, what were the main things that are coming up for you when you're thinking about like getting things done in Enspiral through this device of assembly sprint? You're on mute.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, couple of insights. One of the first things we learned early on was, and talking about that energy boost, um, we really, like, one of my favorite parts of it were the Zoom calls, and we learned to do one at the beginning and at the end, and one in the middle usually, one or even two. And increasingly, we used kind of an open space technology framing for those middle ones, and also trying to invite people who brought the proposal to host something on their proposal. So I think that's almost another piece, but the live events were really important for getting on the same page, getting the clarity, so that people felt like they could speak into topics that were sometimes quite dense. And also just brought energy of like, oh, we're here doing this together. I can really feel that. And the retrospectives at the end, the wrapping up was always like really nice. Much easier to actually sense what each other's energy was or commitment for various things. So it was more likely that things wouldn't get, oh, is somebody going to pick that up? I'm just going to wait and see. But like when you're in the room, you can actually kind of see, are people leaning forward? Are they leaning away?
Mm,
Um, and then you're like, oh, okay, nobody's going to pick this up, and I do care about it enough. I'm gonna take that task coming out of the assembly sprint. Uh, that other point that I started to mention is important too, of the learning of, how can you distribute the leadership for the conversations. And we found it important, as we kind of always have with Lumio, but it became even more important that Lumio threads were hosted, that there was somebody who felt some responsibility for facilitating the thread,
mm,
um, and really facilitating the discussion or the decision that was at hand, that agenda item or that menu item. And we would start to do a little bit more prep with people as they were designing the prompt, even before the assembly sprint started, kind of gauging their energy and commitment for it, or if they didn't have that much commitment but thought it was really important, thinking about who else is connected with this topic and might have some energy to help steward it along. And so one of the useful mechanisms for that was we would throw these midway events, and each agenda item would have at least one slot in there. So we'd kind of do open space, but we'd really try and get each agenda item to have a slot. And it was important that we kept the agenda items, the amount of those, a good amount for the size of the group. So we were finding oftentimes that no more than three actually towards the end. I think we experimented with 4 or 5 earlier on, and it just distributed the energy a bit much because we'd usually get like 20 to 30 people. Um, but yeah, we'd talk to people explicitly about like, hey, can you be here for this midway event? Can you host something on your topic? And so that was kind of a helpful mechanism of getting people bought in, and having them design a process of like, how is your conversation going to move from sharing the context, bringing people in, having a
mm,
conversation, and then moving that to a clear outcome, or to some clarity at least. So we increasingly kind of did process design with people and kind of delegated that process design to people for certain aspects, which probably that renovating membership sprint was one of the best examples. We had renovating membership that had a process even before the assembly sprint of interviews and playing the renovating membership game. And then we also had the financial dreaming track, which also had kind of a well thought out 1, 2, 3 process during the sprint of like, okay, we're going to brainstorm the big numbers and like what could we do with those numbers, and then we're going to try and narrow that down and name some priorities based on us dreaming about if Enspiral had 10,000 or whatever it was.
mm. So it seems to me like a lot of actually careful design goes into the preparation and framing of the whole sprint, like both in the sense of scoping the assembly sprint and really distributing leadership into specific people. So like rather than one person facilitating everything, it's more like, no, like if you want to bring something, how would you actually bring a process along with the conversation, so then you can take people on this journey and at the end there's some kind of result, whatever kind of result you're looking for. And also like almost a very specific method for yeah, designing all these things. I wonder like um I guess one question that is coming up for me based on that is, how do you scope the whole frame of assembly sprint? Like I imagine there's like some kind of balance between, like if you put too many topics, just the attention spreads too much. And I would guess there's always things to talk about and figure out. And so yeah, like how do you manage that? How do you scope the whole frame? Is it related to number of people showing up, or what's your kind of feelings on that?
Number of people showing up is definitely a part of it. And, some of it'll be just a gut check. Um, and just kind of, so luckily for a lot of the assembly sprints, it was myself and Jorium. So we had two catalysts at for most of those assembly sprints. And so we would be meeting with the Catalyst working group and with just each other and kind of sensing into how much energy are we seeing in the platforms and just kind of gauging. But really important was the opt-in, and we would try and get that out quite early, like 6 weeks in advance. So that would really give us a sense. But actually, even before that, we'd start planning these, and we'd get the theme out like 10 weeks in advance, if I remember
Mm,
correctly, and we'd invite submissions on the theme. And so that was our first indicator. How many entries are we getting? And so from there, we start to make the menu. Here's the three things that are you can choose from to engage with while you're in the assembly sprint. And then when we'd go to the opt-in, we typically had that menu already prepared, 3 items, 4 items, whatever it was. And then we'd get another kind of indicator of how many people are going to join. And I think it took us a while to catch on to the lesson, but definitely towards the latter ones, we already had the agenda, but it would become clear to me at least, some of these agenda items are not going to get as lively or do as much as some of the other ones. Like, oh, there's probably only energy that 2 or 3 of these are going to really activate, and some of them won't. And sometimes that was okay. And sometimes, like, I remember one sprint that there was, I think the Better Work Together Academy was on there, and the host of that topic ended up being really busy and so didn't have that much energy to put in, but that was kind of okay because we had a bunch of items, and I think they did one session grabbing a bunch of networking information basically for that project, and it was useful. And that's all they did, but that was just perfect. They had, little collective intelligence on it, and then, kind of that open space. It's over when it's over, and law of 2 feet, like it got as much energy as it did. So yeah, the planning was good, and the design could definitely help, and it created different experiences, and kind of bringing some of those principles from open space. And one of the other lessons we learned was doing like recaps during the week. So like trying to do a weekly message or beginning and end of the week, I think we were even doing. Um, Here's what's alive, here's what's moving, like just clear signposting about where things are happening. That was
mm,
really helpful because then if one of the topics was clearly kind of falling off of people's radars or just wasn't catching people's energy, then people could kind of see that and they didn't show up to an empty room, so to speak.
mm. Yeah, it's fascinating to for me to connect these dots. I mean, y like it feels to me you're really speaking from this catalyst point of view, and it's so cool to hear like this really carefully planned like energy checks and the energy management in the room and like sensing, where's the energy going and not, and helping to move it and facilitate the kind of the energy flow of the group. So I'm curious, actually, like maybe from this point of view, like, so let's say there's the assembly sprint, like it's going, there's certain tracks, some topics that people are showing up or not so much. What was your role and Joriam's role as catalysts and kind of like, I guess, meta facilitators of this whole process? Like, how do you uh, actually catalyze this process to flow as well as possible, whatever well also means, because I assume it can mean many different things.
Yeah, I feel like it was mostly, and I think JV pun this metaphor for the catalyst position of like the theater attendant who like shows you to your seat in the theater or something like this. And like I feel like it was a lot of just like answering where's the action happening, where's that file, how do I access this thing. So I feel like it was a lot of just being available and responsive. Um, there was the design, as you said, like, having a bit of a structured process with some clear signs posted, an agenda up on the wall so that people could self or you wanted to make effective systems so that you didn't make an administrative nightmare for yourself, basically, because you didn't have, as a catalyst, a lot of time for it, really. So you tried to make it as clear on the upfront, and there's a system for, where to go, where to be, what time the thing's going to be in advance, so that you're not answering a bunch of individual questions or trying to. You're still building the plane while flying it, mind you, but but yeah. So I think that was a lot of the role. We didn't spend a lot of time in the topics, although sometimes if it was like touching on our area of work within the network, we would. But a lot of just like facilitating the Zoom sessions, doing that hosting, and then being, making sure that the high level structures were clear. You had your Lumio subgroup, you had your Slack channel, you had those once or twice a week synthesis or recaps, and yeah, facilitating the retros was really important. We learned to do those in the assembly sprint, so get the learnings while people are there and active, and so that let us iterate it quite well. I think we made changes every time, and oftentimes to good effect. They got better and better, like more outcomes. Um, and then that follow-up stuff of making sure stuff gets into the handbook, and just reminding people of like, oh hey, like it seemed like everybody was on board for your thing, like were you going to act on that? And just that little light prompt at the end, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like this attention to like how things end and the next step. And maybe this is also worthwhile mentioning. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was that if you opt in to participate in assembly sprint, that means that you get to participate in the decisions that are being made. While if you don't opt in, you just kind of get to observe. So that was, at least, am I understanding this correctly?
More or less, the way we ran them was largely trying to create a group that was going to make the decisions. And the hypothesis behind that was that these decisions require context, and also noticing a pattern of a bunch of people putting a lot of work to develop a proposal, and then them getting a negative feedback at the final mile, and that
Mhm.
really deflating that group, and that person who maybe brought the negative critique doing it from a positive place, but not necessarily having the energy to rebuild the proposal to fix it. Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. And so my the technical protocol for it was actually that, because we had two levels of membership, which we no longer have. There's just one level of membership now. But we had the members who had a stronger decision-making power than contributors, although it was a bit vague in our handbook, in our agreements. But we said that any contributor who joins the assembly sprint, who opts in, can participate in those decisions, and should do. Um, and we still left the members who had historically always had blocking power, if you will, to retain that blocking power, even if they hadn't. Like basically, members could join an assembly sprint partway through if they heard an update of like a big decision is about to be made as part of this assembly sprint. We would try to announce to the whole network so that anybody in the network could witness. We tried to do it transparent like that, so that you could see like, oh, they're looking at changing the whole membership model. And maybe I was just like on vacation or sabbatical for 3 months, and I totally missed that this was going to be a topic. We tried to give people good advance notice so that people could. We had heard that people are like, oh, it's really a bummer if something I care about comes up for vote. This was a problem before assembly sprints. Sucks when something comes up for vote and I'm just like, I'm working 4 jobs right now. So like I'm not going to participate. That sucks. So part of it was, and why we'd even give that 10 weeks notice was like, hey, you can plan it into your schedule if you really care about that topic. But even with
Mm,
that, some people still going to miss it. So we still allowed, but really we didn't have that behavior actually from the members in the end. Maybe in one case we did, but somebody who had missed the call or didn't realize that they really felt like they should be part of it, and they joined, and I think it went fine. But generally speaking, I was trying to create we are the governance group. We've taken on this mandate. We're going to move this forward together.
that makes a lot of sense. And I guess also it's very encouraging, right? Like for people like, hey, come and join this conversation. And that's how like shaping the network looks like in a very practical terms. Like this is this one moment when we all come together, when we all plan, whoever cares and, has interest and capacity to actually show up, have this conversation, build this context together, sense make whatever needs to, be sensed into, and then hopefully come up with a proposal that then can improve the network or take it to like this next step, whatever, the next step is.
Totally.
So what's the current status of assembly sprints of Enspiral? Like we changed quite a lot recently. No more two-stage membership. Nodes are emerging. How do you feel the future of decision making and governance and assembly sprints in particular looks like for us in this couple of years?
It's a lot of not knowing there. I think there may be another time for an assembly sprint. I think right now it doesn't seem like there's one on the horizon as far as I can see, from my position in the network. And part of the reason for that, in my eyes, is it's not insignificant to run the process. And we don't currently have a catalyst, although there's certainly still energy I hear from certain people who are involved in various working groups or the board that there might be a catalyst again. So I think if we have people in a catalyst role or even a more focused catalyst role, like I think I'm really excited and hopeful about the idea of maybe that on this side we're just talking about what might become the Kumara node for Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand, that came out of Summerfest, and we're very much gatherings is a key piece. We're starting with two working groups, our gatherings working group, and then our cultivation slash governance kind of node formation group. And I'm excited that, really either one of those working groups, but possibly the gatherings working group could have a catalyst down the track, and then what would that look like? And would they run an assembly sprint? I don't know. It's interesting to see the most recent big decision get made without an assembly sprint, although it really was based on the work that we had done with the renovating membership uh, assembly sprint. And then Joshua and Uli ran a tight working group with maybe one other, and presented the nodes proposal, and we voted on that like we had done in the old days, just a one-off. And that worked pretty well with given the context of the pre-work and the conversations that had been had. So yeah, I reckon that there will be another time for that. It'd be quite useful to do one, honestly. I mean, it's great to see too, like Enspiral adjacent efforts, like the Doing Better Work Together virtual conference. Like all of us are getting better at how do you do work online, and how do you have convergences online where you have a purpose and you gather people for a specific period of time. I mean, I've just hosted my third virtual work retreat, and it went quite well. Like we had lots of meaningful outcomes. So I think we're not done with that format to just go scope out from assembly sprint, like the idea of a gathering or a working bee. And we've done working bees at Enspiral for even before the assembly sprint. In some ways, the assembly sprint emerged from doing like half-day working bees. I remember in 2017 or 2018, how I became a member was joining one that was um, right before I became a catalyst, actually, and looking at balancing the books and various things. And we just did a half day, and some of us met in person, and some of us joined online. So that was almost a predecessor to the assembly sprint, and we kind of opened that up then with the assembly sprint. So yeah, I think there's still some life for the idea, even if it's not as assembly sprint.
Mm, for sure. Just transforming and going through another iteration. And it's kind of cool to hear that like this latest big decision actually happened through this like what we used in the past. So there's like make this one-off decision without an assembly sprint. Like, okay, basing still on assembly sprint. It seems to me like this is one thing that Enspiral is kind of good at, is just to like making this adaptations to the amount of energy that's available, and just like okay, let's do it this way because this way just doesn't seem to be moving, so we just need to do something. So okay, let's do it this way now. This is really really cool to observe because yeah, it makes this constant progress and things are moving forward. What is kind of curious for me, like kind of segueing into this topic that you mentioned, like bringing this idea of assembly sprint and transforming it and what can emerge from that, or how to combine that with a virtual work retreat and this kind of things, different conferences. I wonder, like, what could be the lessons here or the usefulness of just this idea for decentralized organizations that are in some way similar to Enspiral, like working online, things are moving, but the usual coordination problems, like when people should be paying attention, who has pieces of context to actually make relevant decisions. You want to make a decision, but 10% of people actually pay attention and participate in whatever is your voting mechanism. So I'm curious, like, as a catalyst, as a person who ran those assembly sprints, and also especially as a person who witnessed this whole process of them being applied in different ways to Enspiral, like how different organizations could learn from that, and like what problems could assembly sprint like things solve, and what's like the easiest place to start.
Good question. I definitely think if your organization has a participatory nature, or you're a member-based organization or network, and I think the number of people is important, and I don't know what that number is. Maybe it's upwards of 40, 50. And I think the other parameter is variations in availability of your people, like the assembly sprint. One is designed for a remote or global network in a certain way, or like people can't gather in the same place, because in-person conventions are really useful. We've been doing them for a long time for a reason. We know a lot about doing them as a society. But if there's big obstacles for that, there are options with these sorts of designs. And I think I encourage networks to give it a try, and doesn't have to be so big. I think it can be a couple of scheduled meetings with time and space in between those meetings for smaller groups to do work on a topic or two, or more. And I think, yeah, give a go at even just do a half day thing if you really have never tried doing a remote working party. you know take 3 hours, out of find a time that works for your people. And that can be really useful. And I think part of what the assembly sprint brings is giving folks advanced notion of here's a topic that matters to your organization or network and might matter to you. So maybe put this on your calendar. Um, and then, yeah, off the back of that, to move that work forward and then to share it back with the whole organization and network afterwards. I think that's the basic principle in it, and it is supporting involvement of people, and it is supporting the collective intelligence of your organization and network, and people feeling like that they, it's building that buy-in as well, of people feeling like they're a part of driving it, and that there's a structure by which they can meaningfully participate and help steer and help bring the gift that they have to bring to the organization. So I think that's some of the magic sauce. And I definitely think that, bigger cooperatives, um, bigger nonprofits that keep engaged with their members and there's two-way communication should look at these kind of patterns, and it is just about finding those useful rhythms, and also finding the technology that works for your members, of course. Enspiral is relatively tech savvy, so we are able to use some tools that let us do quite a bit of organizing online without having to be in real time on a video conferencing tool together. But other communities may require more handholding, more teaching them the tools as they join, and things like that.
Hmm. Thank you so much for sharing all this insight. Feels like we went on a beautiful journey. I'm coming always through these conversations like, yeah, more context, more awesome ideas to play with. So thank you so much, John, for sharing. I think this is a good place to end unless there's still something on your mind bubbling.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Michał. Great to share out some of our learnings from this. There'd been a blog kind of waiting to be written that never got written. So here we've created something out of all that thought work and action that happened.